In the small market east of Forsyth Park, among the vegetable stalls and the friendly vendors, there is a woman everyone calls Ellie of Herbs. She always has a smile on her face, a small figure, her silver hair curled at the nape of her neck, her hands always quickly tying bundles of herbs with hemp string. Many people stop by to buy ginger tea or ask her for a remedy for insomnia. Few know that her smile is not born of an easy life, but the product of someone who has been through hell and back. Her full name is Elellanar Bennett. She is 72 years old. I first met her when I was looking for a herbal remedy to help me sleep. Instead of selling me anything, she invited me to sit down, poured me a cup of lotus root tea, and said, "What you need is not tea. It's a story." She tells the story not like a storyteller trying to relieve her sorrow, but like a skillful surgeon opening a wound that has healed, not to open it up to blood but to let the listener know. This body has been hurt, has suffered, but has survived and even become stronger. I used to think that only war or disease could destroy a person, she says. But no, there are things that are more silent and persistent. They take the form of love, and by the time you realize it, you have lost both your youth and your faith. She begins to tell the story of her time as a 19-year-old girl working in a sewing factory in Savannah. The long, tiring days with the steady sound of sewing machines like the fake heartbeat of a body about to collapse. She became pregnant with her first child, a son named Junior, when she was too young. The child's father left after hearing the news of the baby. A common story, to which everyone shook their heads and said, "Men these days." But Ellie didn't blame anyone. She only said one sentence that made me stop writing. "I thought, if I can't be loved by anyone, I can at least love someone to the end." And I chose Junior. The boy grew up in the arms of a mother who always came home after 10 hours of standing at the computer, with a sore back and blurred vision, but still patient enough to sit and help him study. I used to think, if I loved him enough, he would grow up to be a good person. A simple and beautiful belief. But as Ellie said, love, if not accompanied by limits, can also become a thing that corrupts people. I didn't ask any more questions. She continued, "I never thought that the child I raised with all the tenderness in the world would be the one I feared the most. And the cruel thing was, it didn't come right away. It came slowly, like water seeping through a crack in a stone. First came the strange looks, then the hugs that were too long, the words that seemed indifferent." She looked out at the street, where the golden sunlight was pouring through the row of climbing roses. "I used to think I was imagining too much," she said. Who would doubt their own child? And then, one day, everything collapsed. She had a stroke in the sewing factory, while sewing the last shirt of the day. A hammer-like pain struck her neck. When she woke up, she was lying in a hospital bed, unable to control the left side of her body. At that time, she sipped her tea. I kept thinking, God took my body away, but in return gave me a son who knew how to take care of his mother. And then she stopped. She looked straight at me, as if to make sure I understood what she said next. But I was wrong. What I thought was care was the beginning of the most terrifying 10 years of my life. When she returned from the hospital, the house was no longer a home. It was a box, no lock, no strings, but still locked a disabled woman in her own life. Junior, then 22 years old, hugged his mother's shoulder, saying in an emotional voice, "I will take care of you like you took care of me." Outsiders would think, what a filial son. But the most terrible stories in the world often begin with the sweetest words. Mrs. Ellie said, in the early days, Junior helped her bathe, feed her, and help her go to the toilet. No one suspected, not even she. I still believe that blood relatives could not be betrayed. But then, everything began to go awry. Like a painting turned a very small angle until people realized the whole scene was distorted. He fired the caregiver sent by the hospital. Martha, the gentle woman with the wrinkled but clean hands, disappeared after Junior had loudly told her that she didn't understand how to take care of my mother. From then on, there were only 2 of them in the house, and the isolation began to set in. I was convinced that only she could take care of me, she said. She said I was weak, I was dirty, that if I didn't clean myself properly, I would die of infection, and so each afternoon, the so-called bath time lasted nearly an hour and a half. The fingers of the son who had learned to hold a spoon from his mother's hands now touched her body as if he were holding an old, voiceless object. I knew, but I was helpless, she said, her eyes never leaving the cold tea in front of her. When a person cannot move one side of their body, cannot get out of bed on their own, then that person, no matter how conscious, can easily become a hostage to their own beliefs about their loved ones. When I asked her if she was afraid, She nodded slightly, but then smiled sadly, afraid. But the biggest fear is not of being violated. It is being seen as worthless, as if I were just a corpse to be cleaned, turned over, fed and discarded. She tried to resist, with her eyes, with locking the door, with weak refusals. But each time, Junior would coax her with breathtakingly sweet reasoning. I love you, Mom. I just want you to be clean. I don't want to lose you because you're not clean. I started to doubt my own feelings, she said. I didn't know if what I felt was disgust or just paranoia. When people are in hell long enough, they start to confuse the heat of the fire and the cold of numbness. Until one night, Junior came into the room after she turned off the lights. He said he was lonely, that no one could love a man who had to take care of his mother all the time. He said she owed him for making his life what it was. And what happened next, needless to say, was what ended Ellie's remaining illusions. After that night, she said, I was no longer her mother. I was an object for her to use, an excuse for her to exist. And I understood that forgiveness, if it came, would not come from motherly love. It would only come from a trial. After that night, it was no longer a series of ambiguous acts. It became a daily rhythm, relentless, regular, like a clock ticking by a hospital bed, counting down what was left of a person. I no longer thought of myself as a living being, Ellie said. I was just a creature that breathed, ate, lay still, and suffered. Junior created a care schedule, including baths, massages, and physical examinations. All of it was medically disguised. He cut her off from the world. Friends were not allowed to visit. Neighbors were turned away at the door. Even phone calls, if any, were routed to her under close surveillance. That house had no iron gates, no high fences, she said. But I have never seen a prison that was as solid as that. On the outside, Junior was still the model son. He went to the market, brought home medicine, and smiled politely at the neighbors. Everyone said, Mrs. Ellie is lucky. What could be better than having a son like that? As for her, every morning she woke up in a dimly lit room, hoping she wouldn't wake up tomorrow. Once, she tried to reach out and call the police, but her mouth couldn't speak clearly, a consequence of the vitamin pills Junior forced her to take every day. The operator thought she was confused because of the after effects of a stroke. When Junior found out, he didn't scream. He just sat down next to her and said in a voice that was frighteningly calm, if you do that again, I'll tie you up. And people will believe me, not you. Who would believe a paralyzed old woman who stutters? Who would believe you more than your own son who has spent his whole life taking care of you? I believe him, Mrs. Ellie whispered. Because he's right. No one thought a mother could be abused by her own son. Because there are things in this society that they don't want to hear, much less admit. At that time, she said, I didn't ask anyone for help anymore. I just asked God, if he could hear, to end it. But the end, like everything in life, came from the smallest detail. An accident, an unforeseen crack. That day, a neighbor named Johnson, who hadn't visited for a long time, happened to be home with a cold. And while resting in a chair near the window, she heard a scream. It wasn't the kind of scream that hurts your leg, or a seizure, Mrs. Johnson recalled. It was the kind of scream that only someone who has been tortured mentally and physically to the extreme could let out. She knocked on the door, and Junior remained calm. My mother had a stroke. I gave her medicine. She's fine. But Mrs. Johnson didn't leave. Maybe it was a hunch, or some kind of maternal instinct. She pushed the door open and saw the figure that had once been Ellie, shaking, sweating, handprints on her neck, eyes pleading for help. Then came the ambulance, the doctor, and a strange moment. For the first time in 8 years, someone asked Junior to leave the room for a private examination. The resident that day was a young man in his early 30s, with a stern face but a listening gaze. When Junior refused to leave the room, he said only one thing: this is a professional request, not an invitation. Junior reluctantly stepped out, leaving the door closed, and for the first time in 8 years, privacy was restored around Ellie's body. The doctor, she said, didn't ask many questions, just looked at me, long and very quiet, as if waiting for my body to tell its own story. And her body, which had forgotten the language of freedom, began to tremble. When he asked, is anyone hurting you? She didn't say anything, but her nod, slow, was enough to bring the first wall down. He called in a social worker and a female psychiatrist. All three, none of them seemed shocked. They didn't scream. They didn't hug her. They just sat down beside her, put their hands on hers, and said, tell me what you can. What you can't say today, tell me next time. I never knew that silence could be listened to like that, Ellie recalled. And in that atmosphere, I spoke. Even though my voice was broken, even though my hands and feet were out of control, I spoke. They listened not as men on duty, but as men who had heard painful words before and knew how to believe them. Junior was called in for a confrontation. Of course, he denied everything. He said his mother was paranoid after her stroke, that she often said nonsense, that he was the one who had given up everything to care for her for 8 years and now he was being lied to, betrayed. He lied as easily as he breathed, the young doctor later said. But the scary thing wasn't the lie. It was how he believed it. But this time, Ellie wasn't alone. The medical examinations, the physical injuries, the old and new marks spoke for her. There was no room for denial. Junior was arrested at the hospital, handcuffed, carried away, watched by nurses, guards, and a few other patients who watched the scene like something no one wanted to believe was real. He was screaming at me, calling me crazy, she said. But the only thing I felt was a hollow sense of relief. 2 weeks later, Ellie was taken to a new home. A modest house on the outskirts of Savannah, where she lived with a distant cousin Sarah whom she had forgotten existed. She came without warning, she said. Just put your hand on my shoulder and say, I don't know what to say. But if you want a place to live and not be afraid, come with me. And so she left. Without luggage, because memories don't need packing. Just a body that hasn't healed and a soul that doesn't know if it can be revived. Sarah lived in the suburbs, in a small cream house with a green porch and jasmine climbing over a wooden fence. A kettle was always boiling in the kitchen. A rocking chair was by the window. Everything was quiet, and most importantly, no Junior. The first 3 nights, I couldn't sleep, Ellie said, looking out the afternoon window. Every little noise, the drip, the wind made me cringe. Sarah didn't ask questions, didn't touch me unnecessarily. She was just there, quiet. For someone who had just escaped from a prison without bars, kindness sometimes had to be dispensed slowly. Sarah took her to see Melissa, a physical therapist. A small woman with a firm voice and eyes that didn't shy away from hurt. You're not a broken machine, Melissa said during her first session. She is a body that has been through so much fear. We are not just going to teach her to move her hands. We are going to teach her to be touched without pain. I didn't believe I would recover, Ellie said. But they did. And the strange thing is, when someone believes in something they don't dare to believe in, it becomes possible. The exercises started small. Deep breaths, wiggle fingers, practice sitting. Each time her left hand moved a little, it was a victory. Small, but she said, it was the first victory I had, and no one could take it away. In addition to physical therapy, she began psychotherapy with Dr. Harrison, an older woman with gray hair and a voice that sounded like she had lived many lives. You are not wrong in loving your son, the doctor said. You are wrong in thinking that love is enough to keep someone from becoming a monster. That, according to Ellie, was the first step in helping her undo the guilt she had carried for years. It turned out I wasn't a bad mother. I was just someone who loved her with everything I had, even if it was blind. As time passed, movement returned. One afternoon, as she reached for a cup of tea, her left fingers curled up. She burst into tears, not because of the pain, but because for the first time in nearly a decade, her body responded to the world. I don't want to be a victim forever, she said. I want to live as someone who can give something back, whether it's a tip about a plant or just a cup of tea that tastes good. Melissa suggested she do something with nature because nature doesn't ask about the past, and it doesn't judge. Sarah suggested she relearn herbal medicine, something her mother had taught her when she was a child. And so, in a kitchen filled with the scent of dried cinnamon, sliced ginger, and lemon leaves, Ellie began to rekindle a new life, the life of someone who had lost everything, but was brave enough to start over from the smallest bud. Ellie's first pharmacy had no sign or cash register, just a wooden table on the corner of Sarah's porch, with a few glass jars of dried leaves, cloth packets of spices, and a few handwritten signs in felt-tip pen. Lotus root tea helps sleep, chamomile soothes headaches. She didn't advertise. She didn't solicit. She just sat there every morning, making tea and telling stories. People didn't come for the medicine, she said. They came because someone looked them in the eye and said, I used to have the same pain. Some mornings she sold just 1 packet of ginger tea, but 3 people stayed to listen to her talk about how to breathe properly when anxious, or about the leaves that soothed widows' broken sleep. The first person to come in to buy medicine was a middle-aged woman, her face tanned, her hands rough from working as a manicure girl. She asked for something to help with anxiety. Ellie didn't ask why. Just make tea, hand it to her and say, "Everything that is born naturally needs time to heal. The same goes for the heart." Then the woman returned. She brought her sister, then her mother-in-law. Soon the wooden table on the porch was no longer big enough to hold the jars of herbs. Sarah was the first to suggest, "You should open a small stall at Forsyth Market. More people will come there." And so Ellie of Herbs appeared not as a businesswoman but as an old woman selling gentle words and dried leaves. She did not hide her past, but she did not show it off either. When someone asked, "How do you know so much about healing?" she simply replied, "Because I needed it so much." Sometimes late in the afternoon, after she had set up shop, she would sit for a while, sip tea and look silently at the park, not to reminisce, but to remind herself that true peace doesn't come from forgetting memories but from surviving them and still choosing to be gentle with life. Junior was sentenced to 12 years in prison, she said. "I wasn't happy, nor was I hurt. I just felt things were finally falling into place." 3 years later, he was released for good behavior. When he returned skinny, sickly, leaning on a cane and standing in front of the shop, begging for help, she just looked at him for a long time. "I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sorry. I just felt, now you know what it's like to be helpless. And perhaps, what it's like to have no one listen to you." Later that day, she closed the shop early, went home, had a cup of perilla tea, and slept soundly. That night, "I dreamed of my mother for the first time," she said. "She didn't say anything. She just held my hand as if to say, 'You've done enough.'" When Ellie finally leased a small space in Forsyth Market with a roof, wooden shelves, and a handwritten sign, she called it not a shop, but a breathing corner. "People buy medicine for their bodies, but a lot of people come here really, just to breathe," she said with a chuckle. Every morning, she still walks 3 streets, carrying a cloth bag of herbs, a pot of tea, and a notebook with the names of people who have stopped by. She doesn't just sell herbs. She records people's sorrows like a prescription. In the back of the shop, she sets up a long table and a few wooden chairs. Every Tuesday night, she opens the door to a group of women. No registration, no strings attached, no statements required. Just walk in, pour yourself a cup of tea, and sit down. "I don't call it a support group," she said. "I call it a place where people who have been silenced can talk." The woman who was beaten by her husband, the mother, shunned by her son, the wife, seen as a decoration in a cold house. They all came, carrying stories they had never dared to tell. And when they told them, even parts of them, they left with a little straighter backs. "I didn't heal them," Ellie said. "I just sat there, living proof that survival is possible." She didn't preach, didn't advise. She just told her story, no embellishment, no exaggeration, the way a person crossing a desert points to a well without forcing anyone to drink. Once, a reporter came to the market. They heard a rumor about the old herbalist who cures with memories. The next day's headline read, "The woman who turns torture into medicine and pain into freedom." She appeared next to a pile of dried plants, a simple smile, her hand resting on a cup of tea as if listening to someone else's story. "I don't need anyone to know my name," she said. "I just want them to know, if you've been hurt, you have the right to come back." One afternoon in early autumn, when I asked her if she still dreamed about the past, she just shook her head. "I don't dream about the past anymore. I live with it, but I don't live in it." Junior, the son who became the prisoner, is now in a public nursing home, sick, alone, dependent on the kindness of strangers. "I don't curse him," Ellie said, "but I don't forgive him either. I just don't let him live in my head anymore." And now, at 72, how does she live? She has a small shop, a quiet but stable community of women, a partner, Anthony, who comes by with daisies every Friday morning. A quiet life, but enough to make people believe there are people who have lost everything, but can still live again, with their own hands and their gentleness. "I am not a victim," she said. "I am a witness. If you ever think you cannot get back up, remember Ellie's story. That no one is too old to start over. No pain is meaningless if you turn it into a guiding light for others." This is Mother Tells Stories channel, where the silent things are heard. If you find something in this story touching you, leave a comment, or simply click like as a whisper. I am also learning to live again, day by day.